And welcome to Let Them Talk. I'm Paul DiRienzo. We have a great show planned for you today. We're going to, for folks out there, friends Dana Beal, and been following the saga of the Yippies on Bleecker Street. We have Dana's attorney, Noah Potter, one of the organizers every year of the marijuana smoke-in as well, and who's been working on trying to save 9 Bleecker Street, the Yippie headquarters, for 40 years. And we're going to be, we just got off the phone with Dana from the correctional facility. Now, first of all, for folks who might not be following this show, don't know who Dana Beal is the, he's a very important person. He's the probably the most well-known advocate of legalizing marijuana in America today. Among the most well-known.
His significance is in many forms.
Yeah.
Whether he's the best known, I tend to doubt. There's a lot of higher profile people than him. I mean, could run through the names, but Dana occupies a very interesting space because he was a theoretician who laid the foundation for the, as far as I can tell, for the movement as a whole. He's probably, I think it's fair to say, he's probably the oldest, longest-serving activist.
Yeah.
Person that's currently active. I mean, maybe John Sinclair, he's an activist as well, but I mean, Keith Stropp from NORML is probably the founder of that particular line of legalization, right. But Dana's, senior guy who's been active all this time.
Right, and poor Dana, about 3 years ago, he had the misfortune of being arrested with 150 pounds of marijuana in the state of Wisconsin, and through a series of complex events, he wound up doing the last couple of years in a jail in Nebraska.
He has been in jail in Nebraska for quite a while. I have a little bit of difficulty sorting through when he's where.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
But yeah, he's currently in Nebraska.
But he is, for folks who know Dana and are happy about hearing this news, Dana is about to be a free man.
He is about to be out on parole. His release date is February 12th. But he's not out. It's not done. He's not a free man. He's still obviously under the supervision and control of the state, but he will be outside of the facility, which is a big deal for his ability to communicate with the outside world, because he's really limited. He's extremely limited in his phone access, mail access. It's a great challenge, but he's been actively organizing everything he can, even in prison. I mean, he's probably more productive in prison with 15 minutes a day to make phone calls than most people are on the outside. So,
So what's he going to do on February 12th? I mean, he's already calling us up and trying to find a place to stay. He's allowed to come to New York on parole?
He is, in principle, allowed to come to New York. He has to make arrangements that will satisfy the parole boards of 3 different states, Wisconsin, Nebraska, and New York. So you can imagine it's a fair amount of logistical work to make that happen. But he is cleared to come to New York pending identification of a suitable location, because 9 Bleecker is his home of 40 years is not available. He's not permitted to go into 9 Bleecker Street, actually.
And we're going to be talking about that in a minute.
Okay.
We're getting up to date. I want to give people a reason why we're talking about 9 Bleecker and why we're talking about the Yippies. It's about Dana Beal, and I think a lot of people are real interested now Dana, because the building is important, but the person inside the building, who lives inside, is the key thing, what it's about. We can always find another place, but we would like to keep the place, but that might be not possible.
Well, if I can cut in, I mean, the place is not gone, and it is worth fighting for the place. So I mean, there's a bit of both.
Oh, good. We'll be talking more about that, because there's a lot of confusion around that.
Okay.
Let's talk about Dana a little bit. So Dana is going to be released February 12th on parole.
Correct.
Okay, so then he has to satisfy 3 parole boards in Nebraska, Wisconsin, and New York.
Correct.
That he has a appropriate place to stay in New York City. Now, what is an appropriate place in New York City?
Well, first of all, let me say that I speak with Dana every day, every other day, more or less. Sometimes I go a few longer, but I speak with him about many things. He has many different legal issues, and I'm not the point person on the parole issue. I have some understanding what's going on in Nebraska, but I can't say too much. I mean, my understanding is the parole board in New York will come to check out the space. They have to know whose it is, where it is, get some information about the prospective host. I don't know a lot more than that. I know that Dana worked very hard to get the Nebraska authorities to be open to the idea of New York. Well, I shouldn't say I know that. That's my understanding, is that he had to, he had to line up a lot of a lot of people.
A lot of
three
ducks in a
states.
row.
Basically, yeah,
Right.
to try to come back to New York because he really wants to be here.
So the friends of Dana who are out there right now who are talking to us, this is the place. Is there a phone number? If somebody has
No.
a space for Dana.
If you wanna,
If there's somebody out there who has a space and is willing to put up Dana Beal, the famous Dana Beal,
right.
and has an extra room in their pad, and they are pretty cool. They have a lease, and they're legally in their place, and they're not about to be evicted, and they themselves don't mind talking to a parole officer and showing them that they have a good job and that they're willing to have some responsibility for Dana Beal, the famous Dana Beal. Anybody out there in the marijuana movement, anybody out there who loves this guy, and we all love Dana Beal, who's got a big enough apartment that can put up with a guy with as big a personality as Dana Beal, right? Is there a phone number?
Yeah. Not really. I mean, I would prefer not to give out my number on the air, and we could discuss that. It's my work number and my personal number. But they could use people to email me if that would that work.
Yeah, that
Noah
email
Potter,
is fine. Yeah.
Yeah, Noah Potter at noahpotterlaw.com.
That's a good one. That's fine.
Yeah.
Okay, so Noah Potter, NOAHPOTTER.
Right.
One word.
Right.
At Noah Potter.
Let me do it this way. It's Noah Potter, Noah like Genesis 6, Potter like Harry, at noahpotterlaw.com.
Okay, good. So we'll repeat that too as folks go on, and so they can get in touch with you by way of email.
Yep.
Right. Also, there's a Facebook page for Dana Beal. If you're on Facebook Dana Beal.
It's free Dana Beal.
Free Dana Beal, right? Free ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And just go to Free Dana Beal, and you can leave a message there as well. So if there's anybody in the city who has an extra apartment, an extra room in their apartment, or an extra couch where they can put up Dana Beal for a few weeks. I think he was asking for 5 or 6 weeks till he can get settled.
Right. Well, to paraphrase, in his explanation, he needs a place to come to in New York because he can't go to 9 Bleecker.
Right.
What he does when he's here. Again, I'm not up on the specifics, but he needs to come here and settle in.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the best thing to do, actually, even better than emailing me directly, is to post on the Free Dana Beal page. Just say, I'd like to discuss what's involved in giving Dana a place to stay in New York. And when you post, that message will get passed along to the appropriate authorities.
Great, the appropriate authorities. Right. So Facebook, Free Dana Beal, Free Ourselves on Facebook. Just type in Free Dana Beal on Facebook. You'll come right to it. So good. And leave a message that you are willing to help Dana find a place to stay in New York. This is really where people who understand Dana know Dana. This is where all the things he's done for us, this is something we can do for him. Right? And there must be somebody out there who might have an extra small, tiny little closet that they can turn into a bedroom for Dana. And all right, great. So let's talk about 9 Bleecker Street now, because 9 Bleecker Street, on the corner of Bleecker and Elizabeth, between Elizabeth and Bowery, has been Dana's home and has been the Yippie headquarters since 1973, right? But what has happened is that since Dana's been in jail, things have sort of gotten a little dicey for the continued existence of this famous location, the Yippie Museum, right? Of which I'm on the board of directors of, so I know to speak a little bit about it. I'm on the board of directors of the Yippie Museum, which is has nothing to do with the actual real estate, but has to do with the exhibit of the history of the Youth International Party, right? Abby Hoffman, from the days of Abby Hoffman and Paul Krasner and Bob Fass on WBAI, through the various generations of young yippies who followed afterwards and were involved in many different movements.
So where should I begin? What's to say?
Why did he live there? How can you live in a place for 40 years and start to lose it?
It's a long story. It's a very long story. Let me. Can I take a step back and kind of give the context?
Sure.
So just so everybody's clear, what's happening? There's a foreclosure action pending. There's a loan against the building. The lender, the mortgage holder said, okay, you defaulted and I'm taking it. This case has been pending since 2009. There's been numerous lawsuits, actually, 3, 4, possibly 4 different lawsuits, I think, banging around the New York court system over 9 Bleecker Street. He tried to do a deal with people in the real estate industry. He was dealing with real estate professionals. And, you got to know what you're doing, because you're playing with the big boys in Manhattan commercial real estate. And, he had a vision for the space. His goal was to transfer title, to transfer the property to the Yippee Museum. So the building, in a sense, would be, I mean, this is my characterization. Basically, it was going to be held in trust for the people, for the movement, for the activists, right? It wasn't going to be, you know, you're not going to be, covering the rent of a for-profit entity with a boutique or something. You're going to have a not-profit entity that's holding this piece of real estate that would serve as continue the organizing space. I mean, it's ironic in a sense to call it the museum because the museum is backwards looking, but this is a museum that's like a living thing, right? Because as it continues to function, it serves an educational purpose. So that was the direction he wanted to go. And let me say that I am representing Dana in the foreclosure. The simple version, what's going on is that the building is cleared because of a court order. The plaintiff moved for the appointment of a receiver, a court officer, to take control of the building. Back in May, the receiver moved to get everybody out, essentially. Back in October, we had an appearance before the Justice Oing at the beginning of January. January 9th was the date. Was it 16th? There's a couple different court dates going on, at which time he said, receivers, got to do what's got to do in the building. Everybody out. You've got a few days to get out on your own steam. Today was the last day to get out. And that's what's happening. That's what the building.
Today is the last day to get out.
Today, under the court order, today was the day where basically Dana and Alice Torbush had the ability to get out under their own steam before the receiver comes and says, "Okay, martial law, I'm taking over," and does what it does with the remaining property. So people are a little bit confused maybe. The building is being emptied because of a receiver, somebody appointed in the process of the larger lawsuit that's going to determine ownership. The foreclosure action itself, which is going to say the lender gets the property, sells it at foreclosure, or goes back to the Yippies, or something else happens.
So that issue continues on.
Correct.
But folks still have to vacate the building by a certain date.
Correct.
Now, today was the final date, but my understanding is there is some leeway on that because they've been having some problems finding somebody to rent the place.
Well, that's an interesting question, and there's some things that it's not really appropriate for me to discuss pertaining to the lawsuit. I'm going to discuss, in a sense, what I've stated as part of the public record, that is part of the court filings. But in terms of the leeway, look. Today is the day. The judge extended the time to get out. The receiver will do what the receiver does. Presumably it'll take a little bit of time to go through all the steps. And if the receiver, depends on how reasonable the receiver wants to be in terms of letting people continue to get stuff out. I mean, there's a lot of stuff. There's 40 years of stuff in that building that had to be sorted and pulled out. And I just finished that today.
I saw a lot of it. You were helping there. Yes, I was there. We were boxing for weeks.
Yep.
Right? Years and years of, this is something it's been in the New York. We just had a big spread in the New York Times,
right,
on the national level, all over the country. Many newspapers, many reporters have come by. Many stories have been done about it. This is an important cultural institution. I mean, it's not the Yippee Museum for no reason at all. Is there? So, without getting into anything you can't talk about, what is we're going to come and see the Yippee Museum turned into a boutique? Into a coffee shop, into something like that?
Presumably it's plausible, because once the plaintiff, Centec, gets, sells the building in foreclosure sale, goes into the open market.
What about the apartments, the second and third floor? Can't they make the money they need to make using the first floor? Or why do they need to evict people from living on the second and third floor?
Well, when you say to evict people, I mean the whoever buys the building or gets the building does what it wants.
Why does the receiver need the second and third floor?
No, the receiver takes control of the entire property. The receiver steps in and acts like the owner/landlord.
Right.
Is basically, the idea is the court's reaching in and saying, okay, this is a situation, I got to step in and stabilize stuff. I'm putting this person in. He's got my authority to act, to do stuff in the building, evict, repair, hire people, etc. So the receiver comes in and says, "This is my building here. So you know what? You pay the market rate, which I say it goes, or my way or the highway." So doesn't matter. I mean, the point being that the receiver requested a writ of assistance to the sheriff to get everybody out, to clear everybody out, and the judge said, well, you know, basically, the technical terms, the judge said, no, I'm not going to give you that order now, but these people are going to have some time. If you tell me they're not out by the time I said they're out, then you come back to me and I'll give you your order. And you'll get the sheriff, you go through the whole, you know, the routine.
Right.
So that's the issue about people getting cleared out. You know, the receiver gets the whole building.
And right now the person who is there has fought it long and hard enough, and it's just too expensive to keep fighting this, and they're forced into a situation where they just have to agree to this and leave.
Well, there's not really any way not to agree to it. I mean, the judge has issued an order. The judge just says, my receiver is entitled to get out whoever's there and rent the space.
Right.
So that's the impetus. The impetus is to get the property generating income, and that's the issue, is generating enough income to pay a market rent, to pay carrying costs for the property.
Why weren't they able to raise the $1.5 million that they wanted for this building, that the owners wanted?
You mean back in the day, before the lawsuit?
Right, before. Is that still a possibility? Could they still get it more?
The lender is claiming it's up to I'm not even keeping track of the number because it's so astronomical. $3.5 million. I mean, because they're counting default interest. I mean, if you want to get into the nitty gritty of what would be necessary to resolve this case, I mean,
the judge seemed to hint that he was looking at $1.5 million. He wasn't necessarily agreeing on all that.
Well, I didn't really catch that. I mean, if we're talking about the appearance, our appearance on the 9th. January 9th. You know, the judge likes to do things in steps. Justice Owing is very, methodical.
Yeah.
And he was not, in my reading was, he was not making any statement about the particular number that he thought should be associated with the property. I mean, not even to the property, but what the plaintiff is entitled to get. What's the total debt outstanding to the plaintiff on the mortgage note. And that issue is totally out there. I mean, we're not there yet. What's pending now is this motion for summary judgment that, again, will do a couple different things to come out of it. But one of them could be, and one very possible outcome, is the judge will say, you know what, yippies, sorry about your sad story, but, these guys get the property. There's a default on the mortgage and you lose. So, in terms of the 1.8, I mean, the 1.8 goes back to the time the original transaction. I mean, should I talk about the transaction
to get for a minute or two? Yeah.
Okay. So, I mean, basically, the idea was that Dana's landlord sold the property in about 2002. He started working on a sale, sold the property not to Dana, who'd been the yippies, who'd been there for 30 years, but to an individual named Harlan Berger, who has taken the property and entered into a transaction about 2 years later in which Harlan Berger's business entity that owned the property, that bought the property, sold it to two corporations, Yippee Holdings and the National AIDS Brigade. Dana's explanation was that this was a transaction intended to pass the building to the Yippee Museum, which was in the process of being formed, but couldn't be formed fast enough because it's chartered by the Board of Regents. You don't just create a museum like that. So the lender, Centec, there was another person who was going to be advancing the funds, so to speak, a complicated transaction. At that time, the sale price, it was 1.4 million on the principal. This all blew up in a foreclosure action in 2009 due to a fairly complicated series of events, and the plaintiff is calculating default interest from 2009, a 5-year period of high default interest. It's jacking the price up to 3.5. So, there's a lot of issues that are open to resolve.
It's giving me a headache just thinking about it, right? So these issues continue on, but leaving the place really has nothing to do with the final disposition of the property.
Correct. And Justice Owing was very clear about that.
Yeah.
He very clearly, to my recollection and understanding, he stated in open court that what happens with the receiver and vacating the property is not an ultimate indication of what's going to happen in the case. And he said, for whatever it's worth, he said, it may be that the yippies will eventually get the building back. So, again, he's very methodical, very good judge. And he issue one issue at a time, and he's not prejudging anything. So, so correct. They're separate issues.
Okay, so all right, so basically, we still might see in a few weeks some other business there, but there's also issues with renovations and rehabbing the building. You can't just put a restaurant or anything in there now. I mean, it needs a lot of rehab. I mean, that's been getting in the way of.
Well, I can't really speak to that. That's more of an issue on the receiver side, what the receiver's going to do, what kind of a deal the receiver will work out with a prospective tenant. I mean, that's right outside of what I can.
Okay, that's interesting. Guess. So, okay, Noah Potter, we're talking with Noah Potter here. Noah Potter is the attorney for representing Dana Beal in this housing action, this mortgage action. And, you know, I keep thinking of Occupy Wall Street and people, you know, losing mortgages and being, what do they call it when you lose your mortgage, a default or...
Well, you default under the mortgage and you get foreclosed.
Foreclosure, that's what it is. Another one of these foreclosures, right?
For sure, absolutely.
Right, and of course Occupy Wall Street has been very involved at 9 Bleecker Street, right? This is almost like a home away from home for Occupy Wall Street from the very beginning. So it is in a lot of ways an Occupy Wall Street facility, right?
In a sense, there is a certain irony there. Yes, I have to agree with you on that.
All right, so a few more minutes. Noah Potter, I wanted to talk, the third thing I wanted to talk about, we talked about Dana and how he needs housing and how you can, if you could possibly help Dana find housing here while so he can get his parole in New York, you can go to Free Dana Beal for yourselves on Facebook and leave a message there and folks will get back to you. We talked about 9 Bleecker Street, the Yippie headquarters, and the headache of all these legal problems that are going on there. And the third thing I want to talk to you about is coming up in May would be the 40-plus anniversary, the 40-plus marijuana legalization march that goes on in New York City that 9 Bleecker Street and Dana Beal have been involved for and has been on this air many times speaking about in past years, right?
Yeah. Just a general sense of the parade.
Yeah, because I know Noah Potter and Doug Green have caused great tittering at the police when they get the permit there because they just love writing out a pot permit to Potter and Green.
Yeah,
I saw the policemen all laughing hysterically. They were hilarious.
Like that.
They were very nice.
Oh, very nice, absolutely.
And worked with us very well. And we've worked very closely with the police and doing this every year for many years, at least since the end of the Giuliani administration. Yeah. So, can you tell us a little bit about what's happening in May?
I can tell a little bit. Yes, we're working on putting it together. Obviously, it's a different situation because it's not being done out of 9 Bleecker Street, so then it's probably the first year that it's going to be the parade done in exile. The same way that, you know, there's a little bit of a Yippie in exile that's going on at this point where Yippie's atomized and you know, spreading into the atmosphere, but the parade is one aspect of that, one particular application. I mean, the idea, there was a changeover last year, and I don't know how everybody's going to feel about this, but we got sponsorship for the first time to do the event from, outside people, in a sense it's a form of advertising. So what we're looking to do is to take it up a level and actually be able to get sponsorship of the event from people who want to be known, want to step forward. I mean, there's a revolution going on around the country. And the irony is, of course, Dana's in jail, 9 Bleecker's, in jeopardy while this revolution is happening around the country.
Well, I keep thinking of the Vietnam War, because we used to talk about during the Vietnam War who wants to be the last soldier killed in a failed war, right? Who would be the last person killed. I mean, there's a World War I, it's actually known the name of the last soldier who was killed in World War I like a minute before the amnesty. So, the armistice. So Dana is like the last, to be one of the last or among the last victims in the war on drugs. We're just at the verge of legalization, sweeping the country.
It's a huge, bizarre, karmic moment of some kind.
And Dana's totally like a medical marijuana guy. I mean, this is a guy who he might have been admitted possession of, ultimately 300 or 400 pounds of pot over a couple of years, but all of that went in small packages to poor people who had AIDS and other illnesses, who would literally come to Dana so they wouldn't have to go on the street and just ask somebody like the one woman we had here many years ago, why can't I think of her name, but she was one of our guests who was arrested in the Bronx when she tried the grandmother.
Jackson?
Yes, Barbara Jackson.
Yeah.
Barbara Jackson, who was on this show several years ago. She's passed away since then, but she had cancer. And her last words, it wasn't the pot, right? She said, the pot helped her. She died in the end from the cancer. But she went onto the streets of the Bronx to buy marijuana for her cancer and was arrested. 70-plus-year-old woman, and they were actually going to press charges against her. I mean, Dana Beal was like an alternative to that. He was a person who you could feel safe.
Well, if I can riff a little bit, I mean,
yeah, go ahead.
Just a few things to say.
A couple more minutes.
Understood. Well, Dana was a direct action kind of guy. Dana's always been about direct action. I mean, my understanding was he was sort of like, kind of the militant wing of the psychedelic movement, so to speak. So it's always direct action, and that's the way I understand the Buyers Club as well. Was government, just get out of the way because we're going to do things the right way ourselves, especially with cannabis and psychedelics. So yeah, I mean, it's crazy ironies that now there's this tectonic shift in New York politics around cannabis, and Dana's, it's like the slipping through the hourglass, so to speak. I mean, Dana will be out presumably in February, but it is. And
he can rejoin the fight.
Well, I mean, I can't speak to the terms of his parole. I mean, I don't know what
parole can be very strict. They can tell you you're not allowed to speak, and you're not allowed to be part of any of this.
Right. Well, he's actually informed me that the state of Nebraska, one of the terms of Nebraska is if he's paroled in Nebraska, not in New York. I mean, I'm not up on all the specifics, but that he wouldn't be permitted to work on a clinical trial of 18-MC. I believe in ibogaine metabolite. So yeah, there's
the cure addiction, and we'll have Dana on when he's free to talk about all this here on the air. So we get all the details. Right, keep your notes, and you can ask questions about it.
Right.
Okay, we have one more minute. How would you like to sum up Noah Potter?
I'd just like to comment on the experience I had clearing out 9 Bleecker today. I mean, it was a very kind of deep moment for me because it was a very formative place in my growing up, in my trajectory in life. And I caught in the process of just pulling out all the documents, a sense of the significance of that institution and the fact that it was a printing house that printed an underground newspaper, the experience of touching the newspapers and seeing how many they were. This is an amazing thing that I don't think exists now in this generation, and it's got its moment to come again. But I got a sense of the power, the significance of that space in going through and pulling out all the documents. I hope other people can share that when they see the documents when they assembled again.
And we'll talk more about that because the museum really is happening, and we're going to have this stuff on the internet and different places for people to see and touch and feel. So thank you, Noah Potter, for joining us here on Let Them Talk. We'll see you next week. Free Dana Beal, free ourselves. Thank you.
All right.